Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Breaking the Game show. I am your host, Stephen Gillespie, and joining me, as always, is my co-host, Austin Carr. Austin, what's up, brother?
Hey, what's going on, Steven? I'm ready for another exciting episode. We've got a lot of fun stuff to talk about. So how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well, man, and we're just, coming to you live here on the Dash Radio's Nothing But Net channel, and we're just going to be discussing a couple of segments that, things are happening in the NBA, Austin. It's early in the season, only a couple games in, and, if you're a team that your team or your player is losing, you say, it's too early, but, if you got vested interest in what's going on in the NBA right now, you're probably thinking, man, like this is everything that I thought it was going to be. Austin, where do you kind of fall on these? Just is it too early in the season for things to be legitimate or not?
It just kind of depends, I think, from one case to another. I don't think that it's too early to say that all of this is, not legitimate, but there's definitely some things that, if I was a fan of a team that's struggling, maybe don't worry too much. But, some of these things are definitely going to carry through to the season. So to me, it's kind of somewhere in the middle.
Okay, yeah, and we got about 5 segments that we're going to go through this morning, Austin. We'll go ahead and roll right into the first one. Right now, the Nets are winning big, Austin. Before we get going into the numbers, I just want to ask overall, is it too early to look at the Nets winning big and think that it's something, or do you think that this is legitimate?
I would say this is a case where it's pretty legitimate. I mean, their star players are playing like stars. They've got depth. The first game against Golden State, I was kind of, pump the brakes a little bit. We've got to see what Golden State's done so far. But after what they did to the Celtics, they just kind of put it in another gear and took off on them. And I think that's pretty legitimate. I'll let you kind of dive into the numbers a little bit and give everybody an idea of what we're talking about. But I would say that if you're a Brooklyn Nets fan or a KD or Kyrie fan, you've got a lot to be excited about this year. They look like they're going to be tough to beat.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you mentioned that Golden State game, Austin. They played on the 22nd. They won 125-99. The team overall, that being the Brooklyn Nets, recorded 0.98 points per possession. Kyrie Irving had 1.44 points per possession. KD had 1.10. The team shot over 45% from the floor, almost 43% from deep, over 81% from the line. They recorded 22 assists, 11 steals, and 7 blocks. They held the Golden State Warriors to 0.76 points per possession. They forced 18 turnovers, and they held Steph Curry to 33% from the floor, 20% from deep. Fast forward to Christmas Day, where they played the Boston Celtics. They won 123-95. They recorded 1.17 points per possession. Kyrie had 1.54. KD had 1.32. They shot 54% from the floor, almost 52% from deep, almost 84% from the line. They had 21 assists, 5 steals, 10 blocks. They held the Boston Celtics to 0.78 points per possession, forced 15 turnovers. They held Tatum to under 41% from the floor and Brown to just 44%, Austin. So when I'm looking at these and I'm seeing the points per possession, that's kind of a new statistic that we talk about here on the show. But I think when we're looking at these segments, it's something that we need to put into perspective, because not only are the Brooklyn Nets, scoring a lot, but they're holding their opponents to under, 0.8 points per possession. That's huge. That's something that we weren't talking about coming into the season, that teams are going to struggle to score against this team, Austin. I think it is legitimate, winning by 26 and 28 in their first 2 games against, the Golden State Warriors, who, yes, are without Clay and Dre, but they have an MVP player in Steph Curry. And then the Boston Celtics, they played really well against the Nets up until about the third quarter, where KD just started doing KD-type things. And I think that this is legitimate too, Austin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the defensive numbers are crazy, because last year, if I'm not mistaken, I think the average in the NBA was like 1.07 points per possession. So, it's pretty being under 0.8 is pretty impressive. And that obviously I think will come back towards the average a little bit. I don't think they're going to hold everybody down like that, but Boston's a pretty good team. They've got a lot of weapons that can score, and I know they were without Kemba Walker, but still, they've got 3 or 4 guys on that team that can go and get a bucket for them pretty much any time they need to against most teams. And, they did a really good job of Brooklyn did of holding them down, of making things difficult for them. The last time we saw KD, in the finals and with Golden State, his defense was pretty elite along with his offense. I think we were kind of starting to see, that total package from him. And Kyrie Irving, the way he's playing, I mean, he had 37 points against Boston. That's just, if he can do that and KD can be KD, like I said, I don't know many teams in the East that are going to be able to keep up with them this year. They're deep. I've said it before, but you don't see a team with this kind of depth, with this kind of talent at the top of the roster very often. It looks like DeAndre Jordan's playing with, some added fire in his game again. Like he's kind of, having a little bit of a resurgence this year. And, they can bring in a whole second unit off the bench and really not lose a whole lot. I mean, it's impressive what they're doing so far. And I do think it's for real. I think they're going to kind of roll through the East this season.
Okay, all fair takes. We're going to roll into our next segment now, Austin. And I'm going to lead off by saying I feel like they're the only team that can have wins against the Los Angeles Lakers and the Denver Nuggets, the top two seeds from the previous season, and everybody be like, so what? And we're talking about right now the Los Angeles Clippers. They beat the Los Angeles Lakers on the 22nd by a score of 116-109. They beat the Denver Nuggets on Christmas Day 121-108. Austin, just looking at this, is this something, or is it just too early to tell with these Los Angeles Clippers?
I think it's something. I think for just about anybody that knows what's going on with the Clippers and what's happened the last year and Paul George in general, people are going to hold off, much judgment until the playoffs. But, there's something to be said about who they beat. Just last year, we saw the collapse against Golden State. And it seems like 2 years in a row now, they've won the opening game against the Lakers. So, I think people, like I said, are skeptical just because they want to see them do it in the playoffs, and they want to see, when there's real, stakes attached to these games. But they've looked good. They came out hot. One of the things that they kind of got beat up on was rebounding and inside play last year. And at least against the Lakers, Ivica Zubac looked really good. He got lots of offensive rebounds. He was aggressive. It seemed like they were taking it to the rim. Paul George had a good game, but like you said, everybody's going to kind of say, oh, it doesn't matter with Paul George until it gets down to playoff time, just because of his, track record there. But I do think there's something good you can take out of beating the top two teams in the West from last year. So what do you think?
And it seems like one of those things where like all these, leadership questions that were kind of circling the team coming into the season are already starting to fall by the wayside. Tyronn Lue is running a triangle offense with this team, and that kind of suits that mid-range game of Kawhi Leonard, and it lets Paul George open up his offense a little bit more. And they've added reasonable talent. Luke Kennard, I've seen questions about why have they extended him the way that they have, and we could get into a whole nother discussion on, the way NBA economics work and stuff like that, but we're not going to do that today. Mm-hmm. Overall, though, if you look at the Lakers game, the Clippers recorded 1 point per possession. Paul George had 1.43. Kawhi only had 0.84, but the team overall shot 47% from the floor, 35% from deep. They hit all of their free throws. They recorded 22 assists, 10 steals, 3 blocks. They held the Lakers to 0.96 point per possession. They forced 19 turnovers, held LeBron James to only 41% from the floor and 37.5% from deep on a pretty good number of attempts. And then if you fast forward to the Denver Nugget game on Christmas, they recorded 1.19 point per possession. Kawhi had 1.24, left the game early because, he caught that elbow by Serge Ibaka. And then Paul George had 1.10. The team shot 55% from the floor, 50% from deep, 83% from the line. They recorded 32 assists, 9 steals, 4 blocks. They held Denver to 1 point per possession, forced 13 turnovers. And then they held, Murray and Michael Porter Jr. to only 45% from the floor. So looking at these numbers, that 32 assists stands out to me because not only were there leadership questions coming into the season, but also who's going to be the lead playmaker. And it's just amazing to me to see how the Clippers are answering these questions, albeit in a young season, Austin.
Yeah, I think some of it is part of that triangle offense that you mentioned. I think it's a great way to get multiple guys going in an offense like that, and that does kind of focus on the mid range. And you mentioned 52% shooting from three. That's not gonna last. Nobody shoots that good from three for a whole season. But from what I've seen so far, I don't know that they need it to. They're going to be a good team defensively. Obviously, Kawhi and Paul George are both elite defensive players when they want to be. And adding Serge Ibaka, I think, like we talked about on our last show, is one of the most underrated moves of the offseason. They're going to miss Montrezl Harrell, but I think more than they needed his scoring, they needed Ibaka's defense and rebounding a little bit. And I think that's going to help them a lot. Jokic still had a big game against them, and like I said, it's going to come down to the playoffs really for this team. They could finish first in the West and set the world on fire, and everybody's still going to say we need to see it in the playoffs. So I'm kind of trying not to withhold too much judgment. I do think that there's something to be said about beating Denver and the Lakers in back-to-back games like that. Like, it's not like they beat a couple of pushovers. So, things are looking good for them so far, but I wouldn't be too crazy excited until we see more from them in the playoffs.
Well, Austin, we just had the game happen, last night as of this recording, but we did get a question from World Star Jason. Appreciate you tuning in. And he said, just real quick, this wasn't a part of our show, but can we talk about our thoughts on the Rockets and Harden? And Austin, when I was watching the game and when I woke up this morning and had a chance to think about it, this kind of shows exactly what I was talking about before the game started coming on, was that trading Harden before the season starts doesn't really do anything for his value. But when you see him ball out and have, over 40 points and almost 20 assists in a game where he didn't have John Wall, he didn't have Boogie Cousins and Eric Gordon, and we're 2 points away from winning this game with a brand new team, essentially, I think that this increases his trade value, exponentially, and something that we'll probably see moving forward in the season. Austin, what do you think?
Yeah, I kind of said it from the get-go. I didn't think it would necessarily made a whole lot of sense for him to ask for a trade right now. I just think with Boogie Cousins and John Wall, and once they're healthy, like, this is a pretty dangerous roster. I think this may very well be one of, if not the best rosters that they've had since he's been there. He's kind of always only had the one other star, and sometimes never even had that. The first year with Chris Paul, they won 65 games with a roster that wasn't, anything too crazy up to that point. And I would have liked to see, if everybody was all in one more year, what he could do with those guys on his team. Mm-hmm. But, you're obviously right. It ups his trade value for sure. It's not like when he gets on the court, he doesn't do this kind of thing every time. It's just, it's the other things. It's the antics. It's the off court stuff. And
the dribbling, the hole on the floor, on offense. And how does that translate? Sure. Yeah.
Right. But I just think this would have been fun to see, him with John Wall and a healthy John Wall and a healthy DeMarcus Cousins, and see how they could actually, coexist. Whether or not they could, who knows? But I think it would have been fun to see. But obviously, it definitely ups his trade value. He had a heck of a game last night. He almost won the game kind of single-handedly for a pretty short-handed Rockets team. So.
Yeah, and Christian Wood had a good game too. All right, Austin, we're gonna go ahead and move on to our next one. Transition to the no-win Nuggets. And Austin, before we get into the numbers, is this something or is it too early?
I think this one's too early. I'm not too worried if I'm a Nuggets fan. You've still got Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic. They've been in each game that they've played. There were some pretty egregious missed calls at the end of that game against the Kings, where, if a couple of those go the Nuggets' way, they win that game. And the Clippers came out with something to prove against Denver. And, Denver just kind of showed them up a little bit in the playoffs last year and at the end of last season. And I think, the Clippers wanted to come out and kind of prove that they weren't that team anymore, that they've put those losses behind them. So I'm not worried. They played they played well in both games. They looked pretty good in both games. Their defense leaves a little bit to be desired still. Obviously, they're going to have to pick it up on that end. But I think they'll be all right.
Yeah, I think that it's too early to kind of jump off the bandwagon for the Nuggets. Although before the season started, I predicted that we probably would see a drop off with this team due to the loss of the front court depth that they had with, Jeremy Grant and Mason Plumlee. And also before that, trading away Malik Beasley and Juancho Hernan-Gomez. But looking at this team now, they lost by 2 points in overtime against the Kings, and then on Christmas Day they lost pretty handedly actually by the Clippers. And again, they were without Kawhi Leonard for a large stretch of that game. So, missing a star player, I think that's a little bit of something. But overall, you lose a game that you probably should have won against the Kings, and losing to the Clippers is right now, based off of what we just said, that's something that a lot of teams are going to do for this season. So we'll see how they look moving forward. But I would like to point out that they were out rebounded by 8 and by 6 in both of these losses, Austin. So I think addressing that rebounding, because yes, Nikola Jokic does get rebounds, but he's really not like a super aggressive rebounder. It seems like they just kind of fall to him. Right. And, he kind of saves his energy to kind of help initiate that offense, right, Austin?
Yeah, he's not somebody that, goes and gets rebounds out of position a lot. He doesn't chase down, long boards. He kind of swallows up everything that comes to him, but he's not like a guy that's, out there, jumping across the lane, grabbing rebounds that you wouldn't expect him to get like some guys do. Mm-hmm. So, I think Michael Porter Jr. needs to help on that end some too. He is a big athletic forward. He's got the size to do it. I just think he's got to be a little more aggressive on the boards. And that's something I feel like a good coach can kind of get out of a team. It's kind of want to more than anything. I kind of feel like that on defense and rebounding to a certain extent. And in terms of team wide is kind of just a mindset thing. And I think they'll get there. I think it's early. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and look at the loss that they had against the Clippers too, Austin. They missed 25 3-pointers. Is that something that you expect from this team moving forward?
Not really. And I don't think that's going to be what their MO is all year. They're a pretty good shooting team. I do still have some questions about guys like Gary Harris, but Will Barton's looked good. He's rounded into form a little bit more than he was in the preseason. Michael Porter Jr. hasn't really had a good game yet. So,
no. He shot 45% from the floor against the Clippers,
Yeah. So, if he picks it up and they just play their game, and Jamal Murray is going to have to be Jamal Murray from the bubble for them to win a lot. He's going to need to make that leap to being a star like everybody thinks he has. So, if they play their game and just get a little bit more aggressive on the boards, I think they'll be okay.
Yeah, and just real quick before we transition, Austin, Jamal Murray shot 11% from the floor against the Kings and was 0 of 5 from deep, and they lost by 2. You have to feel like that if he has at least an average game, that they probably walk away with a victory against the Kings.
Yeah, exactly. The Kings played their butts off to get that win, and Denver kind of didn't look like Denver at all. Obviously, like you said, 11% from the field. Even if he has a bad game, a normal bad game, and shoots 30% from the field, they win that game. He just has to make one or two more shots, and I don't think you expect him to shoot 11% very often. I'd be surprised if he's ever had a game where he shot that bad before. So I think they're fine. I wouldn't worry yet. Obviously in a 72-game season, there is a little bit more sense of urgency for each win, but it's still a long season. 72 games is still quite a few. So, it's not like anybody's going to go 72-0. So, we've got a long way to go. I wouldn't be too worried. I think the Kings came out and I don't want to talk bad about the Kings. I think they got lucky, to be totally honest. I don't think they're going to see Jamal Murray shoot that bad again. And like I said, there were some calls at the end of that game that were fairly egregious. So, we clean up a couple things here and there, and they could easily be 1-1 at the very least. And, looking at a much better start than 0-2. So it's not too much to worry about, I think, if you're a Denver Nuggets fan.
Yeah, but we got to, give the Kings some respect because they did just pull off a 3-point win against the Suns too. So the Kings are knocking off some good teams. Maybe we should have talked about them a little bit if it's, too early to tell or if this is actually something. Yeah. But I mean, they're off to a good start. All right, Austin. Speaking of, not doing so hot, we'll transition now to what I'm calling the miserable Mavericks. Austin, is this too early to, to tell that this is going to keep happening, or do you think that this is legitimate?
Well, I'm worried about the Mavericks. I don't know about you, but I'm not sure where they go outside of Luka Doncic right now. I after watching these games, he's had a couple good performances, and they've kind of gotten beat up on the boards. They don't have really a good second option on offense to go to right now. It seems like they're missing Kristaps Porzingis big time, and it makes me nervous putting a lot of faith in him coming back healthy and staying on the court all year. But Luka said it best in the interview after their second loss. We've got to rebound better. We've got to take advantage of the opportunities that we have. And in the NBA, it's hard when you don't get a lot of second chances. Teams kind of thrive on those second chance points, and especially a team like the Mavericks that only really have one offensive option. So I'm worried about this team. I don't know. I'll let you go into the numbers again a little bit, but I'm not too excited about what I've seen from them overall as a team.
Well, yeah. Well, let's put this into perspective real quick, Austin. They played at Phoenix their very first game on the 23rd, and they lost by 4 against a really good Phoenix team. And then they just get the break speed off them by the reigning and largely assumed to be the soon to be NBA champions of this year against the Los Angeles Lakers, right? So on the 23rd, they were outscored only by 0.02 points per possession. They shot 42% from the floor, shot 24% from deep. They had only 11 turnovers, nothing too crazy. Committed 23 fouls. They were out rebounded by 9, Austin. So you talked about the rebounding, being an issue here. How about this? Finney-Smith, Powell, Hardaway Jr., and Maxi Kleber all shot under 42% on a combined 32 shot attempts, which made up to about almost 38% of all of the Mavericks field goal attempts. So you talk about, shooting 40% on 38% of the team's overall shot. That is quite a big chunk to not be shooting so well and expect to win, right? And they only lost by 4 with such poor shooting from the rest of the Mavericks cast. And then fast forward to Christmas Day against the Lakers, they were outscored by 0.08 points per possession, shot just a hair under 50% from the floor, just a hair over 40% from deep. They missed 6 free throws, shot about 77% that night. They only had 9 turnovers, and they only committed 22 fouls. But how about this, Austin? They were out-rebounded by 26, and they made 6 less threes than the Los Angeles Lakers. So looking at that and hearing those numbers, almost getting out-rebounded by double digits in both of these losses, everybody's talking about Kristaps Porzingis making that difference, Austin, but KP's really not a rebounder. What I mean? He's a shot blocker and a three-point, marksman, but he's not really a rebounder. He might get you, about 6 or 7 a game. But even still, if you add that to these totals, they're getting out-rebounded by, a decent margin.
Right. And, I think Dwight Powell was somebody that you and I both had talked about as somebody that was going to come back and kind of help make up that difference. But, he's played in 2 games in quite a long time. So
yeah,
give him a little more time to shake the rust off. The one thing that really is kind of telling for me is looking at, just their pace numbers from last year to this year. Last year, their offensive rating, which is points per 100 possessions, was 116. It was by far the best in the league. This year, it's down at 108 so far. So, that doesn't sound like anything crazy. 108 still sounds good, but that's a big difference. And then their defensive rating went from 111 last year to right now, after 2 games, they're 121. So they're giving up 121 points per 100 possessions. That would by far be the worst in the NBA last year. And that's a crazy high number. Obviously, it's just 2 games, and, giving up 138 to the Lakers kind of skews that a little bit in the wrong direction. And we kind of knew the Lakers were going to out-rebound a lot of teams this year. I mean, they're big all over the court. They can put out a lineup with Kuzma, LeBron, AD, and Marc Gasol out there at the same time. That's crazy. That's a huge lineup. And so I think they've got a good coach in Rick Carlisle. Like I said before, I think rebounding is kind of a want to kind of statistic and a thing that's a little bit about, energy and effort. And I think they'll get there. I think Luka Doncic seems like he's got the right things in mind when he was talking in that interview that I listened to, talking about how everybody across the board has just got to pick it up on the boards. And I do think they will. I think they'll be okay. They've kind of are notorious for having slow starts too. Last year they got off to a kind of a slower start, the year before that as well. So, let's let this team get healthy, get their legs under them a little bit. And like you said, having those guys take almost 40% of the shots and shoot under 40% or around 40% is not a recipe for success. And, we saw guys step up last year that are going to need to step up even more this year, like Kleba. And, I think they're going to miss Seth Curry more than people realize.
Oh, yeah.
So I like their offseason moves. I think they got some guys to kind of help protect Luka, which, in a playoff series, which everybody kind of said they needed some guys with a little bit of edge to them. But I don't know how much better, in terms of actual talent this team got. And, maybe Boban's the answer. Is he still on their team? I think he still plays.
Yeah, he's still on there. He had a decent night, but he's not a guy that you can give a large number of minutes. Like, that guy can only run so much,
Right. But, they need somebody to come in and get some boards. And so I don't know who it's going to be right now. I think even more than the rebounding thing, I just think they miss a second option in Porzingis. I think that'll take a lot of the stress off of Luka, and it'll solve a lot of the problems that they have once he comes back, I think.
Well, yeah, but I don't know, because you mentioned their defense getting worse. Like, that was the theory of trading, Seth Curry for Josh Richardson and getting a James Johnson and players like that. And everybody talks about how Maxi Kleber is like a really good defender, myself included. So kind of the identity you thought was going to shift from, maybe not being so offensively, efficient to, all right, let's have a little bit more two-way ability. Now, to Josh Richardson's credit, he's had some good games, but again, they're playing against the upstart Phoenix Suns, who everybody feels like it could potentially be a top 4 seed in the West. And then we all know how good the Los Angeles Lakers are, Austin. So, like you said, let's just kind of wait. They don't have their second best player, and also a really good, shot to turn around the basket as well, and Kristaps Porzingis. So
yeah, that's true. But you do make a good point that, they were kind of trying to build up the defense this year and change that identity and be a little less of a run and gun team and more of a, let's try to get some stops. And their identity right now is definitely not that of a team that worked on defense all year. So, there are some red flags to be worried about with this team, but like we said, 2 games is a very small sample, and it's hard to believe that they're going to struggle like this forever.
Yeah, and plus, you got to think that Luka's going to get into game shape at some point too. So let's see that come into let's give that a chance to come into effect.
Exactly.
All right, awesome. Well, now we're going to transition to the last segment that we have, and we have a good bit of time that we can spend on this. Mm-hmm. Austin, let's just kind of build into this segment, okay? Last season, there was talk that Chris Middleton was a top 10 NBA player, and there were a lot of pundits out there, myself included, that were like, this is too much. It felt like because the Bucks had the number 1 seed for 2 seasons in a row, that Giannis was doing so great, and that all these other teams had multiple All-Stars and All-NBA players. And there's kind of a logic out there that's like, well, if a team is number 1 for consecutive years in a row, they can't only have 1 good player, right? They have to have 2. And so they threw Chris Middleton into that ring. They said that, okay, Chris Middleton's a really good player, put him in, top 10 in a couple of different, other networks, top 25 lists. He ended up being in the top 10. And there are a lot of skeptics out there. And again, myself included, I was one of those guys. And, there was a lot of talk about him being that good, Austin. Where did you fall in line on that?
Well, when we did our player rankings, I had him right in the top 20, right outside of the top 15. I think I had him about 18th. I thought he was definitely good enough to make an all NBA team, at least a third team. Not a whole lot of guys shoot 50, 40, 90 from the field and average 20 points per game. The list is extremely small. It's like Kevin Durant and Steve Nash and Steph Curry and a couple other guys. But he just missed out on that by, 0.1% last year, I believe. And so I was pretty high on him going into the season. Obviously his game's not the most exciting. It's not sexy by any stretch of the imagination, but he's just a really solid shooter. And I just kind of figured, if the Bucks are going to do any better than they've done in years past, they're going to have to get more from him. And I thought right around top 20 was pretty fair.
Okay, yeah. Well, now let's fast forward to this season, Austin, because the Bucks made the move to bring in a Drew Holiday. They kind of mortgaged their future to bring a guy on an expiring contract who can opt in and continue to play. And there was a lot of talk about Drew Holiday on this team. Obviously, Giannis is going to garner a lot of attention. We're talking about a multi-time MVP, the reigning Defensive Player of the Year. He just signed that Supermax deal. Austin, were we even giving Chris Middleton really much thought coming into this season?
Not a whole lot, and I don't think anybody really was. To be fair, everybody was talking about the addition of Drew Holiday and the other moves that they kind of made or didn't make, and the guys that they didn't re-sign or let go. I've said multiple times how head scratching it was that they talked about wanting to add 3-point shooting and then basically let their two best 3-point shooters from last season go. One they didn't re-sign and one they traded, and I think I saw somewhere where it was like 4 or 5 of their top leading scorers from last year aren't on this team anymore. And so it was an odd off season. There was a lot of moves that everybody made, or that they made to try to get better than that. That seemed like what everybody was talking about. And Chris Middleton kind of just seemed like he fell between the cracks a little bit and wasn't really talked about a whole lot. But that's kind of always been the story about him, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're talking about a guy who was a second-round draft pick, went to Detroit, didn't really do anything. And then in a move that involved a couple guys where Chris Middleton was just kind of a throw-in guy. You're talking about guys like, Brandon Knight was involved in a trade, and he's no longer even in the NBA. But now Chris Middleton goes to Milwaukee, kind of along the same development path as Giannis Antetokounmpo, right? Like, comes in first season, not a lot of expectations, kind of like, who is this guy? And then year by year by year, he steadily improves and adds to his game. Not only is he such a good, 3-point shooter, Austin, which I think a lot of people only look at him through that lens. He's also a good defender. And now this season, he's stepped up his playmaking ability, Austin, and that's been important. And it kind of, again, like how you said, it fell by the wayside in a sense where you figure that Drew Holiday coming in on this team, that he would be running point and averaged about 7 assists last season, that he would be the playmaker. Really, right now, it's been Chris Middleton, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we saw it a little bit in the last game of the playoffs last year before they got knocked out when Giannis got hurt and went out. And I've kind of been beating this drum for a while. I think the Bucks offense looks a lot better when he's kind of running things and facilitating. It definitely makes it easier on Giannis to put him in good positions to catch the ball in a spot where he can make a move and make a shot than have him constantly bringing the ball down the court. And their offense looked a lot more, smooth and looked like it flowed a lot better in that playoff game. And it's looked good so far with the ball in Middleton's hands a little bit more. So, they might be onto something here.
Yeah, well, let's go ahead and dive into the segment now, right? And, we bring up our Twitter chat from our Off the Ball Network buddies. We talk about it a lot here on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. And it's one of those things where, like, sometimes we'll throw an idea into this chat and people will be like, yeah, this is a good idea. But Austin, I threw this into our chat the other day and people were coming for my head because I was like, I said, is Chris Middleton the best player on the Bucks right now? And I did open saying maybe I'm in my feelings a little bit, but Austin, with everything that we just talked about and then coming into this season, I mean, is it crazy to think that there's a case that Chris Middleton could be their best player? Am I crazy for even thinking this?
I don't want to go that far and say you're crazy for even thinking it, but it is early. It is early. If this keeps up, then they've got a pretty incredibly potent 1-2 punch. Obviously, Giannis is a 2-time MVP, the Defensive Player of the Year. He's, his stats are insane for the last couple of seasons. But looking into the numbers this year so far, through 2 games, Chris Middleton has been arguably one of, if not the best players in the NBA. So, you can make a case for it for sure. So far in 2 games, his advanced numbers are insane.
Yeah.
So for anybody that doesn't know a whole lot about, advanced stats or things like true shooting, they say 60% true shooting is elite. He's at 74 right now through 2 games. Steven mentioned that his playmaking has gone up. His assist percentage, which is the percentage of team team field goals that a player assists on while they're on the floor, is just over 30%. So almost 1 out of every 3, baskets that his team's making when he's on the court, he's assisting on. His rebound rate is up 5% from last year. From 10 to about almost 15. His defensive rebound rate is up about 5 total percent. His win shares per 48 minutes, which is the amount of wins contributed by a player per 48 minutes. League average is 0.1. He's at 0.47. So some things that probably aren't going to quite stay where they're at now. Some numbers that are just like out of this world high. He's shooting 57% from the field, 56% from 3. And I don't know if that continues, we're looking at one of the best shooting seasons in the history of the NBA. So I'm sure he'll come back down to earth a little bit there. But so far, his numbers are incredible, and I don't think you're crazy. I don't think it'll stay like that. But you can't say that you can't make a case for it right now, because we're looking at it, we're watching it happen.
And it's carrying over from last year too, right? Like where he was receiving, some sort of attention for being a top 10 guy. He did show in the playoffs that, after just the kind of the rest of the regular season bubble games fizzled out, when they finally did get to playoff games, he stepped up his game a lot. And you mentioned too that, it's better for most teams to have your offense kind of run through some sort of perimeter player, because it helps a big like Giannis to where he doesn't have to create so much offense for himself. And real quick before, we're kind of stat nerds, right? Like we love advanced stats, but we'll get into some more of the traditional stuff and even talk about some of the eye tests, because we don't plant our flag in any sort of camp where we believe that one thing is true over the other. But and this is kind of where I'm trying to build my case for Chris Middleton, is that you look at PER, his PER is 36.6. And for people thinking like, okay, well, advanced stats can be kind of skewed, based on usage rate and stuff like that. Well, his usage rate is about 28, excuse me. So he's got a 28 usage rating, meaning that almost a third of the plays he's involved in at some sort of point in the play. Right now, Giannis is at about 38. So his usage rate is much higher. So you could kind of argue that, okay, well, if his usage rate was up with Giannis, his numbers would be down. That may be true, but let's look at some of the traditional stats now. In their game against Boston on the 23rd, Giannis had 35 points, 13 boards, 2 assists, just a hair under a point per possession, shot 50% from the floor, 37.5% from deep, 75% from the free throw line. He drew 8 fouls, but committed 5. 4 of those were charges, had 2 blocks and 7 turnovers. That being Giannis Antetokounmpo had 7 turnovers. Chris Middleton, on the other hand, out-rebounded Giannis by 1, so he had 14 rebounds, 27 points, 8 assists, averaged 1.12 point per possession, had identical field goal and 3-point percentages, did not miss a free throw at all. He drew 4 fouls himself. He took 2 charges, only committed 2 fouls, and only had 2 turnovers, Austin. So in that first game, yes, Giannis did a lot of scoring, but Chris Middleton did everything else.
Yeah, he's kind of he's stuffing the stat sheet for sure there, and for somebody that's kind of been known as just really a shooter in his career, I feel like up to this point, that's impressive. 14 rebounds is nothing to laugh at. That's against a team in Boston that we've even talked about needing some help on the boards and needing maybe another big man, but they do have Tristan Thompson, who should have helped there, who hasn't played bad, and Middleton has really just kind of taken off this year. He's kind of seems like he's taken it upon himself to take that next step. And we said all along, Giannis signed this contract kind of shows that he thinks that they've got what they need to win there. And maybe he knew something that we didn't. Maybe he saw that this progression that Middleton's been making, in the off season and even into last season, and everybody thinks Giannis is kind of reached his peak too, but he's still young. He's only 26 years old. they've kind of grown together, and there's something to be said about continuity. And they look like the two of them look like they're both going to hit their stride at the same time, and they could be a dangerous team in Milwaukee. They do have the 2 times in a row they had the best record in the East. Middleton just looks like he's playing out of this world right now, and if it continues even 85% of what he's been giving them right now, he's going to be in the running for second team All NBA at least. So
yeah, absolutely. And listen to this argument real quick, Austin. See if I'm crazy. Giannis had a really good game. Chris Middleton was right there with him, kind of stride for stride, but they lost that game with Giannis being their leading scorer. How about this versus the Golden State Warriors on Christmas Day, where they won and blew the brakes off of the Warriors? It was a 138-99 victory. So, again, just real quick, Giannis, when he was, the leading scorer and a lot was running through him, they ended up losing. He actually did cost them that game by missing a game-tying free throw, right? So keep that into consideration. Now, the Golden State Warriors on Christmas Day, they win this game by a large margin, almost 40 points. Giannis only scores 15 points, has 13 rebounds again, 4 assists, only scored 0.65 points per possession, only shot 28.6% from the floor, went blank from deep, had 0 for 3, was 7 of 15 from the free throw line. He did draw 11 fouls, one of those being a charge, only committed 2 fouls, and only had 2 turnovers. So you look at that 15, 13, and 4, very inefficient night from the floor, drawing a lot of fouls, but not even really making the other team pay. Shot 47% from the line. Now look at Chris Middleton in this game where they won and beat the brakes off of the Golden State Warriors. He scored 31 points, had 4 rebounds, 5 assists, scored 1.63 points per possession, almost shot 67% from the floor, shot 75% from deep on 6 of 8 shooting, 5 for 5 from the line, drew 3 fouls, committed 2, had 2 steals, and only committed 2 turnovers, Austin. I mean, so you're looking at this, and I think that there is, in this short sample again, a case that right now, early in the season, that Middleton is their best player.
Well, I would say so far he's definitely been the best player in the season up to this point. And the big thing that you just pointed out to me that blows me away, there was 2 things that caught my attention there. 1.6 points per possession is insane. 67% from the field like that. That's so efficient. I mean, in the age of efficiency, what more could you ask for? And also the free throw shooting. I don't think Middleton's missed a free throw yet this year.
He has not.
And Giannis is 47% in that game. So there's not really the holes in his game that you see in Giannis's game right now. Yeah, he may not be as awe-inspiring and may not make the same amazing, fantastic plays that Giannis does, and he may not be quite the defender Giannis is to an extent.
But he's still a really good defender.
I was just going to say he still can lock up his guy. He still is a good defender. He's not a negative on that side of the ball by any stretch of the imagination.
I would say he's probably above average defensively.
Yeah, I agree. And the big thing there is he can hurt you if you foul him. There's no real way to kind of slow him down if he's shooting like that. Giannis, you can kind of take him out of his game a little bit by sending him to the free throw line. He's not the best free throw shooter. He's not still a very good shooter from deep. We saw what Miami did when they packed the lane and kind of shut that type of offense down. Giannis didn't really have a second move to go to kind of take advantage of the way the defense was playing him. And it seems like right now, whatever you do, Chris Middleton, at least for these 2 games and that last game in the playoffs last year, he doesn't seem like somebody you can really slow down doing any one thing. I mean, I'm sure we'll see teams throw more double teams at him if this continues, but if you can shoot, you can shoot. Sometimes it's, we've seen the Golden State Warriors, go on historic runs of, win streaks and titles just because they were such a better shooting team than the other teams. And, Middleton's kind of showing that he's in the elite class of shooters now. And I think he has been for a while. And, I keep coming back to it, but 50, 40, 90 seasons don't happen very often. And especially with a guy that averaged 20 points a game. And what you said about his PER being 37, his PER and the the usage rate being 28. Usage rate, the more it goes up, usually your PER goes up too. So, that says to me that he's having an incredibly efficient season so far through 2 games. Obviously, Golden State, has a lot of issues. I think that's one where if we talked about them in terms of is this too early or is this legit, I think their struggles are very legit. I don't know how they're going to be. I saw a thing, Kelly Oubre's 0 for 20 on non-dunk shot attempts so far this year.
Yeah, it's not good. And
So,
Andrew Wiggins is not performing very well either.
Right, not much better. So, take it with a grain of salt, but they did beat them, incredibly badly. 39 points is unreal. And they barely lost to Boston, and it was just on Jason Tatum made an amazing shot, and Giannis, like we said, he has a hole in his game, and it's free throw shooting, and that's going to hurt his team for sure because he's going to get fouled a lot the way he plays. So Middleton doesn't seem to have the glaring holes in his game right now that Giannis maybe does. So if you really dive into it, it's not as crazy of a thought as it first sounds when you just hear it out loud.
Yeah, and that's the biggest point that I wanted to make is ultimately if I were drafting a team and I could choose between a Giannis and a Chris, I would probably I would take Giannis. I mean, we're talking about an MVP guy. But again, I just wanted to point out that it's not a slight to Giannis at all by me saying this. I'm really not trying to offend Giannis fans.
Oh, he's only averaging 25 and 13. That bum.
Right. Yeah. I'm not saying that Giannis is garbage by any stretch. I'm trying to shine more light on Chris Middleton, who has every year, just like Giannis, has gotten better and better and better. And now you're talking about a guy who's averaging about 7 assists per game, and Giannis is only giving you about 3. And that was one thing about Giannis that everybody kind of fell in love with is, he's a 7-foot big man who can handle the ball, who can play. Hasn't done that yet. Again, it's still an early season. And for everybody listening right now who is probably saying, bro, it's only been 2-3 games. Bro, it's only been 2 or 3 games. Like, I am aware. I'm doing an NBA podcast. I know exactly how many games he's played. I understand this. All I'm trying to do is give a little bit different of an angle for the Milwaukee Bucks and trying to give, again, Chris Middleton more shine, more light because he is playing phenomenally well. And again, I will say it is too early for me to say that Chris is the better player for Milwaukee. But again, I'm just trying to provide a different angle.
And you know what? Just guys have an incredible season sometimes too. Guys just have a year where everything clicks and they figure it out. And great. It's a great thing for Milwaukee if he does. If he keeps up this, it's not crazy to think that he could have one season that was where he's better than Giannis for a year, numbers wise. And it's not crazy. It doesn't mean that he's the better player overall. It doesn't mean that in terms of all time, Giannis has already kind of shown that he's an all timer, just with the couple seasons that he's had. But he's also shown that he needs help in the playoffs, and he needs a perimeter oriented guy that can kind of carry the load for him when he, when defense is key on him completely. And I think if this goes the way it has, and we haven't even mentioned Drew Holiday. Drew Holiday's looked good too. And he's had a couple really good games, better than I expected him to do. His career numbers compared to Eric Bledsoe are fairly similar, but so far through this season, he's been an obvious upgrade there for them. So, I think things are looking a lot better in Milwaukee than I would have said 2 or 3 games ago. At the beginning of the season, I was a little more worried about him than I am now. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that Middleton's playing like he's the best player on the team right now. So.
Yeah, and there's also this give and take too, right? Where like Middleton can only be this good because Giannis is as good as he is, and I don't think that that's a bad thing to say. But I also would say that Middleton unlocks a lot of things for Giannis too. And adding a Drew Holiday, a lot of people, I think were expecting Middleton to be their third best guy. You can make the case that he's their first best guy right now, Giannis being the 1B. And then Drew Holiday being the third best. What I'm worried about in that scenario is maybe Drew Holiday opts out for this season if he ends up being kind of that de facto third best guy on this team. Drew doesn't really strike me as the type of guy that wants to be like the guy. But again, it's just something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. It could become an issue, but Drew Holiday, you hit the nail on the head. He doesn't seem like the type of guy that's going to be something that really bothers him.
Mhm.
He played behind Anthony Davis for a long time, and you never really heard a whole lot about him. But the years that they excelled in the playoffs and the years that they looked good were kind of the years where he had 30-point games in the playoffs, and he really showed that he could be that kind of big time scorer that he hadn't been up to that point. And I think ultimately they've got a big three in Milwaukee. I wasn't so sure that they did. I would say that you could argue that they have a big three, and that they have one of the more dynamic 1-2 punches right now in the NBA. And a lot of it's just to do with the fact that, if, like I said, if you can shoot, you can shoot.
Mhm.
Anymore, you see all these guys coming to the NBA. They say they have all the skills and all the tools, but they can't shoot. Andrew
Yeah.
Wiggins looks like a guy that should be a 25-point a game scorer, but his shooting is just not where it needs to be. And
Or his
yeah, well, there's a lot of issues with him there. But
Yeah.
I just mean, like, to me, more and more, it kind of showing that being a knockdown shooter is arguably the most important skill in the NBA. So
Yeah, and you're talking about, we celebrate Duncan Robinson. Why can we not celebrate Chris Middleton? You
Right.
know what I mean? So he's
Exactly.
just as dynamic of a playmaker as he is a shooter, right? And Duncan Robinson is kind of one dimensional, right? So, we can celebrate Chris Middleton in the same universe that we celebrate a Duncan Robinson in my eyes.
Well, you heard it here first, everybody. We're putting it on the map right now. Chris Middleton's the best player in Milwaukee. We said it. We mean it.
Yep.
When award season rolls around and he's in the talk for all the big awards, remember, we're the first guys to say it.
But we are experienced, sports personalities. Let's go ahead and build an escape route here in this conversation. That's not to say that
Right.
we would take Giannis behind Chris Middleton. It's just that this
Exactly.
season that he's having a better overall impact for Giannis and the Bucks. But Austin,
Exactly.
this has been a fun episode, man. I appreciate you nerding out with me as always, man.
Yeah, definitely.
I just want to also give a shout out real quick to just the listeners here on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Please go and check out offtheballnetwork.com, the platform that Austin and I, put in a lot of work over there. And there's a lot of other good sports content other than basketball. But Austin, just let's go ahead and say something nice to the people.
Thanks for joining us today, as always, on Dash Radio, on Off the Ball, on Facebook Live, Twitter, wherever you're listening or watching. Everybody, thank you. It's great to have this platform to kind of talk about this stuff. And like Steven said, we're not crazy. We don't think that Giannis is going to be the second best player in Milwaukee or anything like that. It's just a fun argument to make. And we just wanted to kind of shed some light on the fact that it's not crazy. It's not a crazy thought that so far in the season that some of what you're seeing is real. Some of what you're seeing is not real. I think it's, like I said, it's a case by case thing. And, Steven, thank you for bringing up this great idea to do on this episode. It was a lot of fun.
Well, thank you. And I just want, again, a big shout out to all the viewers and listeners out there. Just, please go follow the show. You can find our podcast anywhere podcasts are available. Just keep listening to Nothing But Net here on Dash Radio. Go to offtheballnetwork.com. You can follow Austin on Twitter at AustinCar10. You can follow me on Twitter at StephenBTG, which is, Breaking the Game, the name of the show. But for, the Nothing But Net channel here on Dash Radio, for Off the Ball Network, for my awesome co-host Austin Carr, for Breaking the Game Show, we have been, the Breaking the Game Show, and we will catch up with you guys next time. Much love, everybody.
Have a good one.